Am I unmuted now? All right, sounds like it. Welcome, thank you so much for coming. Let me just put all these gizmos in my pockets. As some of you might already have noticed, this is a bit of a different, not PowerPoint presentation. I come from Lego, and so in the spirit of Game Jam, I figured I wanted to try something different, a bit more of a loose approach to presenting. My name is Jonathan Trier. I'm an interaction design specialist at the Lego Group, and I've spent the last 10 years designing interactive play. And out of those 10 years, I've spent 5 years working together with Nintendo in Japan, which I'll also tell you a bunch about. Before we get to that though, just wanted to introduce this format. As I said, this is a game jam. It's about making things quick. It's about making things fast. So just a quick raise of hands. Is there anybody in here who's the first game jam? Hands up. Awesome. Okay, that's amazing. That's super cool. Awesome. So great. So good to see so many new people here. In the spirit of making something quick, I was like, am I going to make a presentation in PowerPoint? Because PowerPoint to me often is this it's kind of a little bit of a prison, because PowerPoint has certain ways of working that kind of kill my natural creativity, and so it becomes more like shackles and it becomes any kind of a creative tool. And so I figured, how can I make the presentation itself more like a game jam, something that feels more spontaneous, something feels more fun and more playful. I hope today that I can inspire you to make playful things, and in that process you'll hear about how we created Lego Super Mario together with Nintendo, and how we go about creating interactive design and play in general. And we'll be using examples of Lego Super Mario, Luigi, and some other things we've been doing. So to kind of stage set why play is relevant, because I'm sure some of you are like, I want to make video games, I don't care about play. I see, and we at Lego often will say, play is like a foundation. It doesn't matter if you're making games, if you're making virtual reality, if you're making a tool, an app, a board game. If you have something that's playful, let's say, for example, if you have virtual reality, you have hand tracking. You can use hand tracking as a means to do something else, or you could also start by making the hand tracking so satisfying that people will just be like, wow. I mean, seriously, there's a whole game in just making that fun. Not a game, there's a toy there. And then you add the game afterwards. So I think one way of saying it is play is making things that are so joyful and fun that you want to do them without a perceivable goal in mind. And I think the way I like usually to say it is that great play is when you can just hand it to somebody without a word and they'll immediately just start to make up their own rules. Now, I'm not a game teacher or scholar. If anybody is from ITU, I highly suggest you check out, they will know these names already, but I highly suggest you check out Jesper Juhl or Miguel Sicard. They're much better at the game definitions. I'm not a scholar, I'm just a maker. But that's play, right? Play is just this intuitive thing we do. By the way, is the sound level okay? Yeah. Great. So let's talk a bit about interactive play and what we've done recently. We created Lego Super Mario together with Nintendo. Now, Lego Super Mario is an interactive character. So essentially right here what you're seeing is a plastic shell with a screen, speaker, gyroscope, accelerometer, a color sensor, a barcode sensor. All in all, this becomes a toy. This becomes a product, and when you make a great way to combine these features, they become alive. And then the part that is the interactive part is that when you're making play that is interactive, it's different from a football is a toy. You kick it, it goes away. But when you have interactive play, it kind of plays back to you. Like you put Mario on his back, he falls asleep. And now as a kid, I'm like, oh wow, I gotta put him in the hammock so he can sleep well. Or you shake him or give him a poison mushroom and he gets dizzy. The interactivity comes in that the toy responds to what you're doing. It's not just a one-way ticket. It inspires you back to then do something new that then inspires you to do something new again. This we can then use to collect coins like you do in the games, have Mario and Luigi or Peach play multiplayer, or do all sorts of things like get the items you get in the game. Now, the practical way this works is that we wanted to figure out how do we get creativity into this? Because if it's just, let's face it, if we just made this, if this was the whole product, it would be a glorified Tamagotchi. So it wouldn't be a Lego product. we needed that creative spark. That means that you had a reason to build. And so when you get the starter set, this is the one configuration of the starter set. What we actually do is we have this structure where we say, you go into the start pipe, and because you can read a code, that starts the level music. You're now in a level with a timer, and you can collect coins. Then you go through the level, and you collect coins, you go on platforms, you defeat enemies, and then when you finish, it counts your coins. You got 58 coins. That is now a structure for play, a framework for creative play. Because if I told you Lego Mario is about defeating enemies, you'd be like, is that all? No, Lego Mario is about getting items or doing all sorts of things, but without that connecting tissue, the level building, it wouldn't be a Lego experience. So level building is essentially a way that we found to say, you can build your level in this way or that way, you can put it together in that way. This is just a starter set, and that can be configured in like 20 different ways. This is a way that we make sure that it's not just creating single gimmicks, we tie it all together. So my role in this, the thing I do, the thing that's my specialty, is that we jokingly said I was like the Frankenstein of play, because I would breathe life into this basically inanimate object that now comes alive. So I do a mixture of things where a lot of you will think, well, are you an artist? Are you a sound designer? And the thing is, like, interactive play at Lego is new. So a lot of us get to do a lot of things because we're figuring out how to make interactive play as we go. So in my case, a lot of the times I'll be doing artwork. I made all the eyes and the mouth and the pixel art for Mario. I'll be doing the character design. I designed him as a character, the whole how he feels, the molding, the exact way he's shaped. I've been working on the audio, so defining like what kind of music does he play when he goes on platforms, when he's in levels. Also, like, what kind of sounds does he make? What is his voice sitting with the Charles Martinet voice clips of the original Mario actor? And the animation of when he gets dizzy or when he reacts to something, what happens when you drop him? Does he say ouch and complain about that? That's my role, is literally bringing this to life. So at this point, I've been talking and showing pictures, but I'd like to show you a video so this becomes a bit more tangible.
Lego Mario time! Here we go!
This was the launch video. Lego Super Mario went on to become the biggest launch of a new product in Lego's history. So it's been doing rather well. We did this by spending time and playing with Nintendo. And this is going to sound very silly, like, come on, you don't make a product by just having fun, right? This is Takashi Tezuka. He was and is still the creative lead on their side. He's also the guy who, together with Shigeru Miyamoto, invented Mario and Zelda. He was the creative lead on Nintendo's side. So we spent 5 years with Nintendo, and a lot of that time was spent on stuff that I think a lot of you, if somebody asked you, would say, oh, come on, that's not work. You can't be serious, like, that's not work. We would enjoy the city together. We, one time, randomly ended up like in a bar where we did puppet theater with our flashlights on the phones, using napkins for 14 Japanese business people from the Japanese cybercrime department. And the guy they were celebrating something for literally had tears in his eyes afterwards because they thought it was that great. Like, this was just a random thing that happened while we were out having dinner, because we were playing, making things. Even, I mean, I know you can't play with the food and that's not polite, but we did that too. We would look at art together, explore the Nintendo grounds together, skateboard outside the Nintendo headquarters. Even things like when you're on Skype, like, it's really important to get to know each other. We worked together for 5 years. Like things like translate jokes so nobody feels outside. Enjoy the silence. When nobody's talking, don't talk, just think about what somebody said. Things like just be personal, be yourself, ask people, how has your day been? And translate intention. Like sometimes somebody would have a very strong point and it could come across as aggressive. And then I would know that person would be like, he doesn't actually mean it that bad. Like, the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of you guys maybe will be in teams with people you don't know, and everyone is a bit tense and it's a bit tough. Get to know each other. Ask, how are you? What do you like? What are you about? Because getting to know each other is a massive, massive part of making this. Because it meant that when we faced challenges, and we did a lot, and somebody said, I don't think this is good enough. It has to be better. When you actually trust the people and know the people, you know they don't mean anything bad. You don't mean they're not gunning for you. You take that as they want it to be better. This is not a critique. This is not a criticism of me. You don't take it personally. You look at the product and try to improve it. The thing I want you to take from that is actually to work on things that are unique to you. Instead of saying, how can I make the next platformer in black and white, in 2D, that has a portal mechanic, try to ask your friend, like, what do you like? And he likes drumming, and you're like, oh, I love plants. You think you can make a drum plant game? I'm pretty sure that would be pretty unique. When we developed Lego Super Mario, a foundation of that project was we said it has to be something that no other company in the world can do together. Because if any other company could just go and make the same thing, why would we specifically do it together with Nintendo? So this talk is about how to potentially make great play. And now some of you are like, why potentially? I just want to make great play. Like, dude, come on. The reason I say potentially is because Tezuka-san, that you saw in the picture before, he had this great point that he said, I think we're a lucky team. I was like, what do you mean with, what does lucky mean to you? And he said, I think we're lucky because we're putting down the seeds to be lucky. We're planting the seeds to have luck. We never know if we're going to make a success. At Nintendo, we never necessarily know if what we're making is going to be a success. And so sometimes it's all about luck, but you can grow the criteria for that luck to happen. You can make and plant the seeds for that to happen. And so a lot of what I'm showing you today is not necessarily a surefire way to make the best toy in the world, but it is a seed you can plant to make the potential for that play to happen and to be good a lot bigger. So when you do that, you've got to first go to the land of uncertainty. So you know how before I said some of you might think, let's make a 2D platformer, black and white with a portal mechanic. If somebody does that, I'm all fine with that. That's cool, do that. It's just that that's an obvious thing. You can almost already imagine it, right? And so if you want to make something that's playful, new, and different, you kind of got to try to figure out, like, do I dare to go to this new land? Can I get myself together to like go towards this quite longer and not so obvious path where it might be more like feelings or senses, taste, emotions, memories, things that are not tangible, things that you can't just say it's going to end up looking like this, but the potential is so much bigger because if you can find that golden star, that golden nugget of something special, you have something that potentially nobody's ever found before. To do this, you got to embrace the open mode and abandon the closed mode. The open mode and the closed mode, let me explain for a second. This is two notions here. So over here on the left, I'll show you what the closed mode looks like. The closed mode is, you see this talk, you go out of this room, then you say, I'm going to make a 2D platformer. I know I'm hating on 2D platformers right now. If anybody's making a 2D platformer, please come show it to me anyway. I want to see it. I'm making a 2D platformer, and we decide pretty much immediately that we're going to make a 2D platformer. And then this is the making part. Now we're making it. So basically, if I can just color pick a little bit here, this, there we are. This whole thing is the closed mode. And this other one is the open mode. So right here you can see the open mode is relatively small because the open mode is in which you're open to crazy new ideas. As soon as you decided it's a 2D platformer, somebody comes and says, shouldn't this be like a virtual reality experience? And somebody already started coding a 2D platformer. You're mentally closed off. You're like, no, 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 no. I made the code already. Don't change it. Like this is a 2D thing, right? The closed mode is a bit different, and in my opinion, a bit more fun. Because what happens in the closed mode is that now we start exploring a bit more. You go out of this room and you're like, oh, this is the wrong color. This is a bad example if I don't use the right colors. You go out of this room and somebody says, oh, I want to make this plant thing. And somebody's like, no, what about, or like, they don't say no actually, they say yes, because this is like an alternative to yes hat. Somebody says, yeah, but what if it was like a plant game but with drumming? Yeah, but it's drumming and plants and this other thing. Now you have 3 paths going. Like, okay, but that's cool, but oh, what about this thing we forgot up here? And the thing is, the open mode is the courage to trust that you'll find something. Because for a large part of this open mode, you're not like in half an hour, you're not going to stumble over the greatest idea ever. That's not going to happen. Maybe it takes 1.5 hours. Maybe it takes 1 hour, 30 minutes, and 1 minute, 31 minutes, and 5 seconds. And then you're like, wait a second. This is what we want to do. So you embrace the open mode a lot longer. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is embracing this open mode, the courage to try to find something where it feels a bit more like, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I just have a sense it's good. And then of course, like, you got to go back to the closed mode eventually, because otherwise, there's no game if you don't go to the closed mode. At some point, you got to make the game. So I'm not saying don't make a game, just come up with crazy ideas. What I'm about to show you is that you can actually make a lot in the open mode that still is making stuff, but you're embracing that it's not the thing you can already see what is. So let's talk about open mode prototyping. So open mode prototyping is the idea that you want to get going. Nobody just wants to sit and talk at a game jam. We want to make something. Come on, make something. Cardboard something, code something, draw something, make some art. It's great. But the open mode is that you don't decide on what you're going to be making immediately. You keep it open for a bit. You sit down your team and then you say, everyone do something you think is awesome. So one person on your team go out, gets some tape, makes a DIY sword and hooks up a sensor to it. And now he's sensing something with his sword and he starts to play around with it. Somebody's building something out of clay. Somebody is coding something. And this is not coding for any purpose that is, this is how we finish this game. This is just coding something to quickly try something out. Or like making it out of paper. One example I did at one point was when we had, early in the process, we had a version of Lego Super Mario. I had this idea that like, what if we had some sort of a springy mechanism underneath him, like some sort of bouncy thing, so he could actually like physically jump. And like, that's a fun idea, but it's like technically a little tricky because you have to then 3D print a pair of like pants for him that have a springy function, and you have to get that to work, and that's time consuming. Could potentially take 5 days, a week, 2 weeks, depending on how good that is. So what I did was I basically just found a piece of scotch tape, I found a pen, duct taped him or scotch taped him to a pen, and you clicked him, and he jumped. And it was not very fun. And then in 5 minutes, I knew that that idea maybe wasn't worth pursuing for a month. So time saved instead of wasted. That's open mode prototyping. You're making stuff, but you are not going toward a goal yet. You're still exploring. And like, think about it, like the world is a pretty great physics simulator. Like there's so much inspiration to find. Like even just moving this pen around. This could be a lightsaber, zoom, zoom, zoom. Could be a magic wand, zoom. Like imagine if this had sensors and the ability to output some light or something. There's so many things you could do with this. A sword, magic wand, or like, I don't know, a painting, something. You could play with water. I actually, literally before this presentation, made a video that I'm going to show you because I figured I got to talk the talk. So like, literally outside this door, there's this weird concrete block floating around in water. Like, go and play with this. I don't know what the game is, but I want to find out. Like, this feels amazing. This is literally as heavy as like concrete, but it floats. Like, somebody got to make a game out of that, I swear. Like, play with the world around you. There's so much inspiration literally in front of you. Find references. This is similar to what I said with playing with the real world, but the references can be much more vague as well. Like, think about if the texture of the shirt I'm wearing was really special. Maybe I want to make a game where you can feel stuff, or maybe the art direction of the game is like fabric. Did you ever read a poem or like a letter from somebody where you were just like, wow, that just, I don't know, I can't explain why, but that poem just really touched me. That's a reference. You can build a whole experience off of that feeling. Artwork, going to museums, a feeling that somebody shared with you, or something somebody told you. Even just a sport, you say like, I want to replicate the feeling of tennis, like that, the exact point of impact between the ball and the racket, that's a reference. That's a great reference. The stronger your reference, the stronger that exact thing you want to replicate is, the more you can keep going back to that and say, I love this reference. If my game doesn't feel like that yet, I'm not done. As a very concrete example, when we did, part of Lego Super Mario was, we did Luigi's Mansion, and we had a backpack that was the vacuum from Luigi's Mansion. Now the thing was, because it's a physical thing, you actually press his belly to activate the vacuum. The game wasn't the perfect reference for how to make it feel. So we actually found out that there was this particular Dyson commercial, where in the Dyson commercial they showed how the Dysons click together in this nice way that basically was like, it just felt incredible. Like you watch them like, this is a piece of art. Like I want to make this. This commercial needs to be in a museum. And so we basically used that as a reference for how to make the vacuum cleaner feel great. At this point, you got a bunch of references. You've explored in the open mode, and you're itchy to get going because now the time pressure is coming. You're like, oh, I gotta make a game, gotta get done. So you gotta tie all this together. Like you found all these awesome things. You played with the water basin, with the concrete thing outside. You have all this stuff, but you don't know what to do with it. This is where you make your experience pillars. Now I know this sounds boring. This sounds like something you do in a project you have 3 months for, right? This is not what you want to do. But it is though, because basically what you're doing is you're agreeing on the challenge. So say somebody is a team and they've been exploring all the stuff that's here. And then if they say, okay, I think the breaking stuff, there's just something about breaking stuff that's fun. The cleaning up, not so much, but breaking stuff, pretty great. Social, I don't know, breaking stuff and social, that sounds like a great combo. These are relatively vague notions still. It's not super concrete. We're not saying make a 2D platformer. We're saying breaking stuff and social. And then finally, let's add meditative. This is a meditative experience. If your whole team can agree that this is what we want to make, then you basically have a structure for which to start playing. Because now when somebody is saying, okay, what about if it's that you have a tennis catcher but the ball breaks big buildings in Manhattan, and then somebody say, yes, and then you shoot at each other and it has action music. You feel like, oh, wait a second, you're going a bit off track here. I think that's not very meditative. And so the framework is also a great way to avoid conflict on the team, because you don't end up in this weird, I don't like your idea. Your idea is terrible. Instead you say, it's a really cool idea with the shooting in Manhattan. Maybe not for this one, because we said it was going to be meditative. And so you avoid this awkward killing of each other's ideas, and you start building saying, that's great, but how do we make that meditative? And within this, like you can create all sorts of things. That's especially the reason why the pillars don't say 2D platformer. Because if you say I want to make social destruction like meditative, you can start playing around with maybe this is VR, maybe this is a 2D platformer. You don't necessarily narrow it in so much that now you're locked on one thing. If you want to, sure, like if you say, I want to make a 2D platform, I want to do something great with it, you can make that a pillar, but keeping it more open also keeps you more open to different ways of executing this. So at this point, you might also want to decide on a limitation. Now, this is such a boring thing to say, right? We're at a game jam, we can do anything, no limitations, no limits, nothing, just go nuts. The thing about limitations, though, is that they can be really, really neat. So like, let's say we chose 8-bit pixel art as a limitation. Like, all of a sudden, there's so many things you don't have to think about. Your team can focus so much more because like 100,000 things are now out of the question. Limitations can be really, really vital. And a lot of the time, it's also just because when you actually have to make a product, there is always going to be limitations, without a question. On Lego Super Mario, one example is we only have 3 channels of audio. So at any point, we have to figure out how the sound can play without interrupting itself, because there's only 3 things playing at once. There's 100 other limitations with them, but that's just one example. One game jam I made 6 years ago or something, was a game where you had a trunk as an elephant. You had a VR headset, and in the game you would break like tea set. You were at a tea party and you would literally break tea stuff. So the limitation was it's a VR headset and there's a big fat trunk on your face. Limitations can be really fun, don't underestimate them. So now you are starting to make something. Now somebody's coding somebody's building something in 3D. The most tempting thing is to just like stockpile features immediately. You're like, I want this, I want this, I want this. Like 100 things you want already, because ideas just start flowing. This is the point where you've narrowed in what you want to do, and your brain just goes in overdrive, because when you narrow in, it's like 100 times easier to come up with ideas, because now you're not trying to figure out what is it. Now you've said what it is. The problem is now to stop yourself from just executing loosely on 100 things that will never feel great. So single feature mechanics explained is like, and this is just one example. At one point we took an early version of Mario and we put a little backpack with an RFID on his back. So it's an early prototype. So we put a little TNT backpack on him, and the TNT backpack was of course just a piece of code that said if Mario moves violently like this, he will explode, meaning he'll play a sound effect of boom, and he'll say, ow! That's it. The thing is, it's really easy to play with, because now we could say, can you balance him without, can you move him across something without falling and breaking? It lends itself to so many new ways of playing, and like building this just one feature thing. Again, we're talking about toys here, not necessarily games, but when you're making a toy, the one thing you want to find is something that's so easy to do and so easy to understand that people immediately just go like, oh, I want to do this thing. And you go, oh, I want to do this thing. Can I try this thing? You just start getting ideas like that. You got to make this intuitive as well. And this intuitiveness, like everyone will say, sure it has to be intuitive. Like that's obvious, right? So one of the sets from Mario, he's in this poison swamp. He has this little raft so he can sail around. The way it basically works is that when you move him around, he plays little splashy sounds like splash, 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 splash. And so the feeling of splashy sounds while he says wahoo gives you the sense that you are on water. There's no water under you, but it feels like that. That's how it feels in the final product. It actually feels very intuitive. But before we got there, when I started working on this, I just naively said, okay, I think you will sail around like this. And so one of our programmers would sit down and he would implement a gesture that kind of worked like that. You would go in this kind of motion. And then I would try that out, because that was how I imagined you would play with it. And I was like, that works. It plays a splash sound every time you kind of come out in one of the curves. Pretty intuitive, right? You'd think. Then I showed it to the rest of the design team, and the first designer was like, I sail like this. The next one was like, just sailing really slowly, almost not moving. Then one person was like this. One person was like, and like literally the whole team, not a single person did it the same way. So essentially what happened was they weren't getting an output, because the way I had intuitively designed it was not intuitive. I had designed it like I thought it would work, but everyone did it differently. So how do you fix this? How do you avoid this? This is where I'll teach you this funny rule that Nintendo taught me, and this is not how they named it, but this is just how I named it, because they called it that one version looks like a disease and one version looks like a cheese. So let me give an example. We have a tennis racket, let's say this is Wii Sports. You want to code a tennis swing. So an obvious thing to do would be to say, I swing a tennis racket like this. And that's how it works, right? So you code that, and that will look like this. Let's go over here. This is the swing. And this is that swing, right? So I give it to you up there and I ask you, how do you want to swing? And you go, okay, I do this. I'm like, okay, so you do it a bit different. I got to add that. Ask somebody else in the audience. They're like, oh, I want to do this thing. Okay, add that. And then 5 more people, like they have this weird little twist on that big thing the other person does. So now we add this. Then somebody has a twist on the twist, so we start adding this. And like this just keeps growing. For every person I ask, somebody does it in a different way. And you keep having these weird additions to this. Then Nintendo's approach to this, they said, you got to make the window of input as large as possible. So this is the swing now. I'm pretty sure some of you have already guessed what happens now is you get 100 false positives. Everything is a swing now. So this is a swing, this is a swing. This is basically, there's nothing that isn't a swing, because this is just like looking at, this is almost just motion, like any motion is now a swing. So now you're almost the opposite problem. But then the cheese model comes in and that Nintendo says, okay, now we eliminate the things we're sure we don't want. So let's say if you have a tennis racket, you say, it's not, nobody in tennis would ever do this. This is a sword motion. So okay, we eliminate stabbing. Like maybe this is not a tennis swing, like why would pointing it upward? This is not a tennis swing. So we start eliminating that. And you keep doing this with all the things you don't want to be in your game. And so the difference between the two is that over here you keep having to ask people. You ask people, how do you want to do it? How do you want to do it? And you never actually know if you've spoken to every human on Earth and if there's some person who does it in a different way. On the other version, the cheese version, you basically just say, let's make it so intuitive that it's practically impossible to not get a read. And then we eliminate the things that we definitely don't want. And so you can use this no matter what you're doing. If it's the button of the trigger, if it's hand gestures, if it's audio detection, head tracking, gesture tracking, finger tracking. What you want to do is make sure that you're always getting an output, you're always getting a read, and then you start saying, I don't want these things. And that way, you'll make it a lot more intuitive. Now, this is a point where you got to stick with it. A lot of people at this point would say, well, it's working. It's great, it's done. But this is like the difference between a toy and a game. And just so everyone's aware, I'm aware that there are very big differences. So like when people are making games, like just remember this is about making interactive toys. And so some of what I'm saying is not directly translatable, but you can use these premises. If you're making a game, there's probably a point where you're going to say, okay, now the mechanic is good enough. If it's a driving mechanic, it's a car game. Maybe you don't want to spend 5 months polishing the driving. You maybe want to make a level for the car to figure out if it's fun to drive and what kind of driving you want to do. The difference is if you're making a toy, and let's say it's like, that's the tennis racket. It's the main thing is like, if that feels great to do, if the main thing you're doing, if the main toy is good, then everything else will be better. Like with Lego Mario, because he is essentially your controller in the whole experience, the amount of polish that went into making every single movement and every single thing you can do with him be absolutely flawlessly, seamlessly smooth is because he is the one thing you use in the majority of the experience. And so the more time you spend making that fun, the more fun it's going to be. So if it's a vacuum cleaner, let's take the Luigi's Mansion example. You're making a vacuum cleaner. You say, if this is like a color sensor and it detects a color, it plays a vacuum sound. It's like, okay, the vacuum cleaner works, we're done. Let's add point system, timer, difficulty levels, and cool music. That's the thing that's very tempting to do at this point. Because, I mean, come on, it works, right? The thing I'll implore you to do when making toys is to try to see all the best aspects of your vacuum cleaner or whatever your reference is, like really deep dive into what that reference is. If your reference is the psst when you open a Coke bottle, maybe you just like that. And then the first feature you have is like psst when you start your car or when whatever it is, use that reference. You're like, okay, I'm done. But like really try to explore the reference of what you're doing. Like, is it the whole removal of the cap, or is it the shaking of the thing, or what is it about your reference that you can bring in? So in case of the vacuum cleaner, is there a difference between me vacuum cleaning while I'm holding still and moving? Or is it when I vacuum different colors, I can vacuum red. Like you start looking at what are the inputs and outputs that will make this fun. Can I turn it on and off? Is this a thing I can turn on and off? Is there different angles? These things when you're making toys are crucial because it means the thing you have in your hand is now getting so many more levels of interactivity that you can play with. And in turn, what this gives you is that because there's so many more things you can do, the amount of ideas you're getting is so much more vast. Because now every of these little things will be like, oh wait, if I can do this while I'm doing this, or do this while I'm doing that, can I do this? Like your brain automatically starts to make new connections. To give an example, right? A lot of it comes down to making the boring things not boring. Anybody want to guess how long we spent making the walking work on Mario, Lego Mario? What? It's a pretty good guess. Any other? we spent roughly 1.5 to 2 months just on walking. Like, that's a good guess. So essentially, the way this worked when we started was that you would move him, and there'd be a little sound effect. And we're like, okay, it works, he's walking, right? But then, again, combining Nintendo and Lego's skills, Nintendo knowing interactivity said, politely, in the best Japanese way, we think it could be a bit better. And then we spent 2 months making it so that when you walk, the first step has a different sound. So like every time you start, there's a slightly softer step. Then after that, we said, okay, can we make it so that if you walk on your left foot versus your right foot, there's a difference. And if you alternate, and then you add in colors. So if you're walking on sand, if you're walking on grass, like these random little things that seem like such a fluffy thing, but like the thing you got to realize is like when you're taking a product and a toy like this, the thing that people do the most with Lego Mario is walking. It sounds ridiculous, like walking and jumping. You're literally walking around with him all the time, because if you don't make that walking fun, what's going to happen is that kids are going to be like, just like this weird floating around with him, like a scanner. Because if you don't make it fun to walk, if you don't make it super enjoyable to do it, there's absolutely no reason people should do it. The difference to video games is that if you have a video game and you're walking in a video game, and you press right to walk right, like the character does it because it's the only way to progress. Because in a video game, you can have people do specific things. I hand this to any of you and say you have to do something, everyone in this room is going to do something different. You can't force people to do something specific when it comes to playwright. So the only way to really make people do something is to make sure the thing you want them to do is the most fun possible it can be. In case anybody is curious about this way of thinking about what's called versatile verbs in video games, I didn't in any way invent this. There's some really good references on what's called Game Maker's Toolkit on YouTube. So if anybody hasn't seen these things, I highly recommend you check them out. He's really good at explaining these concepts. So now you have a fun toy. You have a really polished, well-working walking with Mario, whatever you're making. Now it's time to, as we'd say, follow the fun. The follow the fun is the point where you just like have these crazy ideas. You're like, okay, what about this thing? You let yourself loose. Like instead of restraining yourself to making this fun, now you open up again. You're still in the making the game, but now that you know your core is really solid, you can allow yourself to go crazy with finding cool things. So this is where we'll talk about video games versus toys, because games usually have rules of some sort. You can die, you have health, you can get points, there's a win state, a lose state, you can have a power-up that makes you invincible for a certain amount of time. All these things in a video game work relatively easily, because in a video game, again, you can force people to do it, in the sense that like the screen is literally telling you if you have the power star in Mario for 10 seconds, you are going to be shining rainbow colors. Like there's nothing you can do about it. If you pick up the star, you get rainbow colors for 10 seconds. That's a video game thing. In real life, you can play the sound of the power star, but that doesn't stop the kids from just going off and doing something completely different, and they will. The amount of times where we've had an idea where we think, this is solid, this is great, this is so easy to understand. There's just 2 rules. You have to go to the red one, and then you go to the green one, and then you win. And we show it to the kids, and they go to the blue one. And we're like, God damn it. Like, it seems so easy, but as soon as you add rules, kids will be confused if there is a way that you can fail. And so the principle we use is this idea of right and more right. So the way you want to do it is you say, if this is a magic wand, you might have a great feeling of a magic wand, but if you want to make a rule, for example, that let's say you want to make spell casting, and you say if you make a triangle, you get spell casting. A right and more right principle is to say whatever you do, any kind of thing will give you a great output, but if you make that specific triangle spell cast in with a magic wand, you'll get a better output. You don't really ever want to punish kids for anything when you're playing, because essentially, if kids do something you didn't anticipate, they're engaging with the experience. There isn't really anything such as cheating when it comes to play, because cheating is just another word for I just made up my own rule, and if kids are making their own rules with your toys, they're engaging with it and you're winning. So you want that. But it also means that if you want them to learn this very specific motion, the only way to make them learn that is to make it the most fun to do. So that's just, I think, really one of the last things I want to leave you with. The big difference with toys versus games is that you can't force the hand in any way. Anything you hand to people that's a physical thing, there's no longer these rules that games can imply on them. You have to just watch what people do, try to figure out why they're not doing what you want them to. Is it because it's boring? Is it because it's unintuitive? Is it because they're not seeing the cue you made? And then you got to figure out if it's because it's unintuitive or you need to make it more fun, but you can never tell them, oh, well, you can try. You can't really tell them you have to do it like this. They might do what you say because you tell them, but as soon as you walk out the room, they just do whatever they want, and then you lost. Unless the thing they do is really fun, but then they still didn't do what you wanted them to. So as a summary of how to make potentially great play, make it really intuitive to understand. Like when I pick it up, I just almost, without doing anything, I know how to do this. This is down to the smallest features. It can be down to the timing of a sound, or like whatever it is this thing outputs. This can be down to milliseconds that can confuse sometimes. Make it super intuitive. Make it joyful to use. You can get intuitive, but it's not very fun. So like add it that when I start just playing around, whatever it is I'm moving or doing, if it's hand tracking, VR, whatever it is, make it fun when I start just improvising. Make it fun for me to improvise. Make it easy to invent my own rules. This almost automatically comes out of 1 and 2. If 1 and 2 are true, 3 almost comes as a given. But you can do things to make 3 better. If there are certain things like with the dynamite backpack for Mario, the reason that works so well was because there's a very clear consequence. He's standing on something, I push him off, and he explodes as a consequence, and that's easy to make rules about. Simple consequences are great. And finally, reward creativity. When kids start making their own random ideas, if you can find a way to get them to feel that, wow, it's almost like they anticipated I would do this, or like you give them a really cool output that they didn't expect, then you're really winning, because you're rewarding the things you didn't anticipate by building it in a way that will reward just all sorts of ways of doing it. So I think the last thing really is, I remember when I was at game jams the first couple of times and there was people who had jobs and were professional, I never knew what to say, and I was so curious to talk to them. So if anybody's like, I have a question about this, or I have this great reference for a thing I really like, please come up and talk to us, the whole LEGO team. We're sitting out in the middle, out in the big open space, and I recommend as an icebreaker, you literally just come and tell us about your favorite one interaction in a game, your favorite toy, like we would love to know, or even, I don't know, your favorite Dyson commercial. That's why we're here. We want to meet people, we want to engage with people. And that's really it, so now there's questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
If you put Mario and Peach close to each other, do they make kissy sounds?
You can make them high five.
How would you do this within a tight scope? So you spent 5 years in LEGO, and everyone doesn't necessarily have that time. So you had a game jam.
So you're talking about how would I do this within these 2 days, for example?
Yeah, for example, or 2 months, or whatever, like different.
I mean, we can say within 2 days, that's fine. You find something you want to play with. And I think the first thing is just to kind of say, like, drop the idea about making a full game. Like, if anybody's curious, my first Nordic Game Jam game was awful. We set our sights on like, let's have this story with branching paths and like several character traits. And like in 2 days, like basically we did the opposite of what I'm encouraging you to now. The thing you got to do is to just kind of be okay with making something that's simple. And the thing is, like, when you have a team of X amount of people, everyone's so curious to do something that everyone's like, okay, I can build a level system, I'll code a level system, I'll make epic art for this MMO we're gonna make. And then all of a sudden you're overscoping massively. So the thing you gotta agree on, and that's really the first part, like these 3 pillars, is you say, okay, are we all cool with, let's say you borrow one of our sensors from out there. There's gonna be a presentation afterwards. We want to borrow one of our sensors, somebody, or even like, let's say something else. Let's say a virtual reality headset, and you just have the hand controller that detects something. You just say, let's just make it fun to throw something and catch it again, and that's the only thing we're going to focus on. Then you don't build the game around it. You don't try to figure out what is this game? Is it a shooter? Does it have a sci-fi setting? It's really about saying, I just want to play with, like, you're in VR and you're throwing an object and catching it again. Because then you get into like a totally different range of things you can talk about. So then the programmer can sit and think about, how do I program the momentum of the thing falling? He just focuses on that momentum. The art person focuses on, how do I make it fun that when I catch it, why is it fun to catch something in VR? It doesn't weigh anything, but how do I make it feel like it weighs something? Can I make the animation so that when I catch it, the animation has this bounce effect, so it's almost like, wow, it's heavy, even though it's not. The sound person looks at, like, how do I make it feel like it's going really far away, and then when I'm catching it, boom. So everyone focuses on just one thing, instead of the casual, I'll just make all this awesome stuff I'm usually doing. Everyone focuses on just this very, very, very tiny thing. And the scary thing about it is that everyone has, at least I did back then, an ego. And my ego when I did my first game jam was this idea of like, wow, it would be great to stand up here and have made an epic game with a story and with stuff. But a lot of the time, if you can nail that feeling of catching something or whatever it is you find, that's just going to give you something that's much more inspiring. And potentially, and that's often what happens with the good game jam games, is that then in the last 3 hours, you just throw a story and throw something at it, and it's good enough that it feels like a game, even though you spent 80% of the time making a toy. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, in the open phase, do you have any advice for people like really diametrically disagree on, like, or someone really has, I really want to do this, like, yeah, team dynamics?
Oh, so if people are very disagreeing on what they want to do?
Yeah.
That's a tricky one, because most of the time, if you're in a professional environment, you'll always have something like, this is what we're doing. And so there is a direction. And so if you are a team where one person is like, I want to do a first-person shooter, and the other person is like, I want to do a 2D thing, and then the third person is like, I just want to do an experimental poem reading VR experience. Like, maybe it's not the right team.
Yeah.
Because if you literally cannot find any common ground, then maybe just do each your own thing. But normally, that open phase, normally it's like, it's having the discussion. You look at each other and you go like, wait a second, you said the thing about destroying something, and you wanted to make something about meditation. Can we make like this? Can you sit in VR and be meditative while you destroy things around you? And then you're starting to work together, right? You're building on each other's ideas instead of just saying, I don't like meditation. That's not destroying things. You try to find common ground.
Yeah, so first question is like the coins that this Lego Mario collab thing you accumulate, are they, what can they like sort of be spent at, and are they like stored on the Mario figure himself or online, or how does that work?
So the coins are purely like, the coins are purely a way to show you progression, to show you that you're doing something. The thing is that if you make it so that you would spend the coins on something, then very quickly the coins become an exercise in efficiency. How can I get most coins? And the creativity completely goes away. So like, we tried that, and the result is like, as soon as we had a place, we had this little shop we tested where Toad would sell you things you could buy. And then as soon as you could do that, the kids would just look at the set and they'd be like, the Goomba gives most coins if I just squash it like this. Ding, 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 ding. And they would continue doing this for like 5 minutes, and they'd be like, now I have 500 coins, and now I can buy all of it at once. And then they were like, okay, I'm done. What's next? You have a follow-up?
Yeah. This actually changed pretty well to my second question with this thing about either cheating or sort of reinforcing, adding new rules to yourself, which was like, do then let's say the created maps based on what they like scale, the more complicated either the length or I don't know, additions of the map, they scale to the amount of coins collected, and as an addition to that, are the blocks sort of connected so that, you know, is there like a limitation to how much you could cheat with the figure just going from beginning to end or whatever?
I mean, think about it this way, like when the kids get these systems, like this building system, right? Some of them, like this is kids, right? Kids don't really think in strategy. Like some kids literally they will just walk randomly around and then maybe they'll finish the level. Some of them will not even start a level, they won't care. But then some of them really like the level play and they'll start the level and they'll meticulously go through. And then some of them will build like a level that goes all the way there, but they'll split it out so they have one section there and then they go on the floor and then they walk up a wall and then they go up there. Like the whole system is made for you to be able to play in a lot of different ways so that it's not like one size fits all, but it's like this is catering to all sorts of creativity. The getting coins in the level system is just, it's a framework for the kids to be like, oh, I know what to do. Because otherwise, it was really hard to communicate. What do you do with Mario? What do you do with the Lego Mario? Do you stomp on enemies? Do you fly? Well, you build levels, however you want, and then all the other things are things you do in levels. And their kids have so many different preferences that they'll do random different things.
One last question.
Yeah?
I was just wondering whether you had any trouble with kids in particular not understanding any of the Mario references because they might not have grown up with them. And there are things that you might have found incredibly intuitive because you played the games and then introducing to them and then discovering that they had a different, or did you know that they all had already a knowledge of it?
No, that's definitely a thing. And it's really tricky. Say the mushroom in Mario, it makes you bigger. We can't scale the Mario figure, he doesn't grow. So that was one of the first challenges that hit us because we're like, how do we make this? And so in the game, or like not in the game, but in the Lego Mario experience, when you get the mushroom, what it does is that when you go in fire, when Mario normally scream, it kind of, he has it on his belly, and then when you go in fire, he loses it, and then he doesn't scream. That's a relatively, like, not super inventive way to use it. But because it's such an iconic item, we had to find some way of using it. So there were certain parts of the game experience that were incredibly hard to translate, like shooting fireballs. We can't do that. So that was not very easy to find a way to make work. And so there's a lot of that. When you're translating a game to physical world, you're going to keep running into that.
That's it. Thank you, John.
Thank you.